Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah McClellan. I am in the Office of Research in the Department of Medicine. I'm a senior program coordinator. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are happy to have Dr. Joanna Goldberg. She's a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Pulmonary, Allergy, Cystic Fibrosis, and Sleep Medicine in the Department of Peds here at Emory. And she will be talking to us today about manuscript development during the times of COVID-19 and how to best use available data and go over some of the manuscript options that we have available to everyone right now. Dr. Goldberg, if you would like to go ahead and share your presentation.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see if that works. And I haven't done this before, so bear with me. And can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes, it's great.
We'll see how I do with this. First of all, again, thank you for having me do this. I hope everybody is doing well and that everybody is okay and who everyone knows is okay as well during this difficult time. Hope everybody's healthy and staying safe and sane. What I'd like to do today is discuss manuscript development during this difficult time, and maybe considering what we can sort of do, thinking about what we're doing when we're not working on our usual routine of working at work, and maybe some other ideas. Looks like we're not a huge group here, so I also thought maybe we could make this maybe a kind of interactive. We could either, if you'd like, interrupt me, or maybe, I think there's a chat box. I'm not sure if I can see it or not, but maybe we could use that. And we could maybe make this a little interactive if it seems appropriate. Otherwise, we can have some time and save questions for the end, but we'll see how that goes. But I thought I'd just start with, the university is closed. Now what am I supposed to do? And just again, it's not our usual routine, and how are we supposed to deal with this? And I think I'll just give you some of the thoughts that I have, and maybe again, we could share some other ideas of how to make this time productive, recognizing that it really is kind of a challenge for us, and this is maybe not what we're used to at all. So maybe the first question is, what should you be working on? Maybe that's the first question, and I'll go through a couple of ideas that I have, and we'll discuss these kind of at length. What could be done remotely? Maybe it's time to reflect on your projects, review your data. Can you write a paper? We'll go into that at some length. Is there an abstract you can write? And should you be writing a review article? So maybe the first thing to think about are studies that can be done remotely. Again, we're not working on site anymore. Mostly all of us are sitting in front of our computer a lot more than we had been. What can we be doing that we could be doing remotely? And for some of us, maybe this isn't that different than what we've been doing all the time. So if a lot of what your work is data analysis, bioinformatics, epidemiology, or chart reviews, those are studies that are generally done remotely. And so maybe day-to-day work that's being done by you doing it this way isn't all that different than what you might be doing in your everyday work now that you are working remotely. Again, those kind of activities are not perhaps that different than what you'd be doing if the university or the hospital was still open. But for other people, that may be something that you'd like to consider adding to the work that you're not normally doing. Is maybe it's time to do more data analysis. Maybe it's time to consider adding in bioinformatics into the work that you are doing. Maybe you've been thinking about doing some studies of populations, but maybe it's now time to take an epidemiological look at some of your studies and to actually dig down deep into some epidemiological studies, or maybe it really is time to do some chart reviews. I think that there are a lot of things that can be done remotely, and maybe now is the time to consider working on things remotely and you haven't been doing before. And this could be the opportunity to do those things. Also, things that can be done remotely that maybe you hadn't had the time to do with is online training. And I don't know about you guys, but I keep getting emails constantly now about online training that maybe I hadn't had time to consider for my research, or that could be, you know, useful for manuscripts, but online training that could be done now that I can take advantage of. Particularly like statistics, there's lots of training in R that are now given online, and or you could just do this kind of training. Or also now is probably an ideal time to undergo some recertification. Is there some activity that you should be considering doing recertification for? Again, these are activities that, you know, again, are part of what you might be doing that while you've been, you know, working on campus, but you could actually incorporate these more extensively into what you are, you know, now you could be doing those. Again, you know, recognizing that, you know, working at home is still a challenge, and you might not have as much time to, you know, devote big chunks of time, but you might actually be able to carve out a little time and do these kind of things while you're working at home. I think what I like to think is that maybe, you know, now that you're in a different place, you're not sitting in your office at work, maybe it's time to, you know, take the time to reflect a little differently on projects, you know, maybe take a different point of view, and maybe it's time to really think about where you really are reflect on these projects, where you really are with your research. Maybe it's time to, you know, if you had a little quiet time with, you know, working at home, or just even time to just sort of step away from the, you know, daily grind of being at work. Maybe it's time to reflect a little differently on where you are with your research. So I think, you know, it's a different environment. I think maybe this is the opportunity. You can take some time and think about looking at things with maybe a little different perspective. Maybe you can reevaluate your goals, think about some new ideas, or maybe just get a different, you know, get it from a different point of view, because you're not slugging away at it. It's your normal pace and the normal point of view, because you have a lot of other things that are going on in your life now. There's a lot of, you know, if you're like me, there are a lot of other things that are challenging you. There's a lot of other thoughts and things that are, you know, pulling you in different directions than your normal routine. So I think it's a good time right now to reevaluate your goals and ideas. And, you know, if you have the time, maybe now is a good time to, you know, re-review the literature and come up with new thoughts and new ideas. And what I've been trying to do is, you know, come up with a plan for what I really am going to be doing when I actually can return to work. So I actually have a list of things that I'm going to do when I, you know, what I sort of kid around and say is when I rush into work, what I'm actually going to do when I rush in. So that's what I've been thinking about as well. So, you know, keep this list going about what I really think is going on. And then, you know, what that's allowed me to do is think about, well, what are the techniques that maybe there's something new that I haven't thought about, because now I've had a chance to review the literature. I have a little bit of time to think about something in a different sort of way. And maybe I can go back and, you know, go back to what I just said. And maybe there's a time, maybe I now have time to go learn a new technique remotely. Or, you know, maybe there's something that, you know, all of a sudden caught my interest. Maybe there is something I can, you know, learn online that I hadn't gotten around to thinking about. Or maybe it's now time to set up a new collaboration. Maybe there's something new that I've wanted to learn, and maybe now is the time to set up a new collaboration. Other people are sort of sitting around not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing as well. And so it could be the perfect opportunity to reach out to an old colleague or a new colleague and say, you know, I was thinking about this project, and maybe we can set up a collaboration when we both can get back to work, you know, in our normal environments. And maybe there's something new, or maybe, you know, we don't even have to be doing it at work, maybe we can set up a collaboration and start something new. The other thing that it's now seems to be a perfect time to do is actually review the data or the information that you already have in hand. You know, I'm not supposed to say this, but, you know, maybe it's time to catch up on your notebook. I mean, if, you know, you're like me, you have a lot of data, maybe you haven't actually, you know, maybe your notebook's not as complete as you'd like, but maybe it's time to review the data you have or look at it again with a different set of eyes. It could be that you are, you know, it's time to, you know, again, look at it, see where you are, and see where things are going. You know, where are you at with this research? Maybe it is you know, what have you got? You know, what data do you have? And, you know, what data do you need? And again, when you start thinking about what the goals of your research are, you know, that sort of gets you thinking about this. And if you've now revisited what your original goals are, maybe you need to rethink about this. And this reminded me when I was thinking about this and actually talking to my lab about this, they reminded me of this whirling vortex of data analysis that Lance Waller from the School of Public Health has presented a couple of times in a couple of lectures that I have seen him present. So I actually borrowed this from a lecture that he gives. And this is his whirling vortex of analysis. And I like this because, hopefully you can see my pointer, because it sort of is where we're sort of, where we are in most of our data. So I think we mostly, hopefully you can see my pointer, we start out with the questions you want to answer. So this is maybe what we're mostly interested in doing. And then you go to try to get the data you need to answer this question. And then you find out the data that you actually can get. And that actually sort of evokes the question that you actually can answer with that data. And then you maybe change the question to the one you really want to answer. And this is called the whirling vortex of analysis. But I think in this time, especially now, where we maybe are kind of stuck, maybe, you know, if you need to do laboratory experiments, maybe you need to get clinical samples from patients and you aren't actually seeing patients at this moment, maybe you actually can't get any new data. Maybe you need to think about what the question is you really can answer with the data that you have. And I've been finding that that's the case with some work that's going on in my laboratory, that we have some data that we have, you know, we had a big question that we wanted to answer. We got some of the data, but we didn't get maybe all the data to answer this big question, but we got some of it. So we have some of the data that we got, but we were able to change the question slightly to answer that question in particular. So again, I borrowed this from him because I think that this gets us to kind of what we'll be talking about when we talk about papers as well. But just maybe you, as you think about the data you have enough to answer one question, maybe not the original question you set out to answer. So again, keep that in mind. So as we think about reviewing your data and thinking about where you're at with your research, without being able to complete work on campus, do you have a complete story? And again, consider that you might need to change the story you wanted to tell. So getting to sort of the point of the lecture today is, can you work on a paper? And the answer is always yes. So in fact, I would say that you should always be writing a manuscript. No matter where you are in your research, there's a manuscript that always should be on your desk, or parts of a manuscript that should always be on your desk. And I will tell you that because of all the parts of a manuscript, and we'll go into them in some detail. So if we talk about the parts of a paper, and I think for the most part, this is should be a review for everybody, but I think we'll go into this in some depth because I think we sometimes forget about that. And then we can talk about them in particular. So we think about the parts of a paper. Again, this will be kind of a review, but it's important. We think about the title. The title and the abstract are what attract the reader to the paper. In fact, the title is maybe the only thing that somebody will ever read about your paper. And so if you haven't enticed somebody with the title, the paper will never get read. So in fact, a title could be the most important part of a paper. The title should be accurate. It should be, but it should be also intriguing. But it needs to be accurate. You shouldn't have a title that says something that actually isn't in the paper. But it also should be enticing that somebody will actually want to read the paper. It also should have, it shouldn't be long and involved. It should be succinct enough so that it will inspire somebody to actually want to then go on and read the abstract. The abstract should be a part of the paper where you actually tell somebody about everything that's going to be going on in the paper. And again, the title and the abstract may be the only thing that is ever read by most people in the field. And it should be, again, very accurate and complete and tell everybody what's going to be going on. The introduction should be giving the necessary background for the field and set up the rest of the paper. The figures should be something that could be actually looked at and basically be able to, the person who looks at the figures should be able to decipher pretty much what's gone on in the paper and should be able to, looking at them, should actually be able to figure out what was going on in the story of the paper without actually even reading the paper. The tables and the legend should again be very obvious what's going on. And the results and the methods should be, again, describing what's being seen in the figures and how the experiments were done. And the discussion is where you can actually elaborate and kind of tell people where you think these results fit into what goes on in the context of what's been done previously. So again, I think the parts of the paper serve very important purposes and are need to fit in very well with each other. And again, they are all tied together, but I think the papers need to be, all fit in nicely. The title, but as I mentioned, the title is something that I actually often write last, although I think about it very early, but I write it kind of last because it has to actually say exactly what's being said in the paper. I also mentioned that it is something that I think papers can be written all the time and should always be working on a paper. Even during this time where, our lives are really complicated and we've got a lot of different things pulling at ourselves, I'd like to say that you should be trying to take time every day to write. And, if you're not writing a paper, you should be writing something every day. The easiest things to write are things that you could be writing all the time. You should be able to write the methods. The methods should be basically able to write themselves. They should be something that are equivalent to what is in a notebook, so they should be just what you're doing. Methods should be what you've done. You don't have to have methods that aren't in of the data that's not presented in the paper, but you should have the methods should be basically what you've done. So every time you do an experiment, you should be able to write a method section up. That should be easy and easy enough to write up. Figures are a great thing to be working on, even if you don't have a paper together, because if you've done an experiment or you're talking about data that you have, figures are wonderful and if you can put together figures, they allow you to look at them and figure out what you actually have and also what you're actually missing. And if you find that you don't have the right controls, then you can put that information on your list of things to do when the laboratory or the university opens or the hospital opens, and what you're missing and what you need to get together and put together. Similarly for tables, if you can put these things together, you can look at them and go, okay, that's missing. I don't have all the right controls. My table seems to be missing this one column that's really necessary. And the legends basically describe what's in the figures. And so those should be really easy to write as well. If you have that data, you should be able to write them. Similarly, the results basically describe what's in the figures. And so the results should be able to be written as soon as you have the figures together. And so you may not know what the paper is all about to say, but you should be able to write all these sections as you work on the experiments if you know kind of what the goal of your project is. And finally, I think it should be, maybe you don't know all the necessary background because you're not exactly sure what the entire story is you're telling, but an introduction should be easy enough to write if you know the background, some of the background for the project that you're going to be telling. So those are kind of the parts of the paper and how I think about putting them together. And that's kind of how I write a paper. And I leave the title and the abstract for last. The discussion depends on where I think the story is going. Again, I may not have all the results together before it's all the paper is together, but these sections I think are pretty easy to write and put together as you're working through things. But it also, having these things all together tells you what's missing and what you should prioritize when you can return to work. So that's what I wanted to talk about as far as manuscripts. But maybe you don't have enough quite for a manuscript, but maybe you've found something interesting and there could be an abstract you could write at this time. And I think, again, I've gotten a lot of invitations to virtual meetings. There's perhaps a remote meeting that you could attend. And it seems like that now seems like that may be the new norm. And that you shouldn't miss an opportunity to network. And that seems like that's going to be a new way to network. And I've been invited to attend, present, and attend these. So I think that this is going to be the new norm. And also I think writing abstracts for those is also a good way to keep writing and also keep your name in lights, as well as keep you on task as far as keeping up with the work that you're trying to get out there. And also if you submit an abstract, I sort of like to think if you've submitted an abstract, somebody's going to expect that there's going to be a paper to follow. So I think it also keeps you in the mode of getting ready to write a paper. So the other thing I'd like to talk about is, should you be writing a review article? And I think that this is a great time and a great opportunity to consider writing a review article. I think, as I mentioned, I think it's a good time to review what's going on in your field. If you can find some time, it can give you, again, a good sense of what's going on. Maybe you haven't had a chance to look at the literature, and it just can give you a little bit of balance for everything that's going on in the outside world. Maybe you can look a little bit more at your research of what's going on, or maybe a little outside your research. And maybe it's time to review what's new in the field, or a new field that you haven't had a chance to look at. It also is a time to learn about a new field, and maybe this is the opportunity to consider something you hadn't really considered before, or putting together two disparate thoughts into something new for yourself. For some of us, including myself, I have some new graduate students who actually didn't have a chance to really complete their rotation. So I've had them actually review topics in the field that they will be studying when they enter the laboratory. So this is a good activity for new students to review what's going on in the field, as well as starting in a project that isn't quite going on in the laboratory yet. So they picked up a new activity, a new project that isn't going on in the lab, to try to put together a few different thoughts that I had, and they're trying to develop a new line of research. For senior students, a review can actually be used for chapters in the thesis, as well as for the introduction to their work in papers as well. And the other thing is that writing a review article can be a really great group activity for your team. And so I think that's been done by a couple of my colleagues, that they're assigning different people different activities as part of a review article. And so they are making that a real team activity. The one thing I did want to mention is that many journals are looking for review articles, but you do want to be aware of predatory publishers. And so Dr. Greeling actually gave me this slide to warn you and warn others about predatory journals. And so this is a slide from her about these journals. So there actually are predatory journals, and you probably get these. I get about 10 to 20 emails a day from journals that don't look like anything that I really should be publishing in. But you know, you get tempted because sometimes the names actually do look kind of intriguing. So they're journals that are actually just looking for you to give them money so that you get your work published. And these are kind of ways that you can look to make sure that the journals that you do want to publish in. So there is actually a list of predatory journals, and you can look and make sure that the journals you're interested in publishing on are not on the bad journal list. And you want to check the journals that you're interested in publishing on to see if they're actually indexed in PubMed, if your colleagues publish in the journals you want to publish in. You do want to be publishing in journals that have that are going to be seen by your colleagues, that have matrices that are recognized, so that actually if you do publish in them, that they can be cited. So I think I also wanted to just mention the challenges and remedies to writing manuscripts. You know, unlike grants, manuscript submissions don't have any deadlines, so it's really easy to let manuscripts sit on the back burner, and you don't have deadlines. You know, you're not teaching. You know, it doesn't have a deadline with like a class. Oh, I've got to get this lecture done. Oh, I've got this grant deadline. Oh, I've got this deadline, that deadline. And so manuscripts can end up sitting there. You know, I actually have some that have been sitting around for a very long time. And as you know, you know, manuscripts are like milk. They don't get better with age. So I don't think that letting manuscripts sit around for a long time is a good idea. I think it's time now, may be a very good time to get things out. But it is a challenge. So again, I'd like to say, try to make deadlines and try to keep them. The best way to do that, and I find this, is if I tell somebody that I'm going to give them something on a date, I usually do it better than if I try to tell myself I'm going to give somebody something on a date. So I work with others. I work better by making myself give something to someone else, and vice versa. So if I ask somebody to give me something by a date, I can bug them. And also sharing your writing with others and asking them for feedback. I just find working with other people makes the job easier, just because you're sharing, and also you just keep working with other people is a much better way of doing things. So again, this is my final thought, which is that working together and on writing projects is an excellent way to keep teams engaged with common goals during this challenging time of sheltering in place. And I think with that, I would sort of like to open the Zoom to other ideas if other people have thoughts to share.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Goldberg. So does anyone have any questions about anything specific to something that you might be working on now, or looking to get started or move forward with your research?
If you have data for a manuscript, but it's not all there because you had to shut down the lab, is it still worth putting together the manuscript and trying to submit it somewhere with the intention that a reviewer may ask for that information later?
I definitely think so. I mean, there's a couple ways of doing it, and in fact that happened to me, so I'll use that as an example. We had submitted a manuscript. They asked for a few things. They said, oh, it would be nice if you did these controls. It's not really, oh, these would be great controls to do, and we couldn't do them. And they were really just controls. And they came back and we said, we can't do them. And they are like, well, why don't you write a short communication? So they gave us sort of that as an option. So I definitely think it's worth doing it. I think what I wouldn't do is overstate what your conclusions are so that they ask you to do things that you can't do, that you aren't showing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely worth doing. And what I wouldn't do is set yourself up so that it's like, that you set yourself up so that they do come back and ask you for those things. I think I would definitely be honest about what you're showing. So don't overstate your conclusions by doing that.
Thank you.
Joanna, do you think there's any risk in submitting a manuscript like that that's a little bit incomplete and having the journal flat out reject it? And so you're closing the door on that one?
Yeah, that's why I would not overstate your conclusions. I mean, if you can state things that you've shown, if you don't have the right controls, I wouldn't do it. But I think if you can, I think that I would just be careful about what you're stating. Because yes, you don't want it to be flat out rejected. What do you think?
There's a question in the chat box. Can you see that?
Yeah, how do you know?
Go ahead and repeat the question in case others can't see it.
How do you go about finding free databases for secondary data analysis potential from public health departments?
I do not know the answer to that question. Do you, Kathy?
No, I know there are some that are the free access, like the NHANES database. You might just Google that. That's a CDC database that has a lot of data in it. I am sorry, we don't have a better answer for that question.
Anyone else? Has anyone come across any, not problems, but roadblocks that they've experienced during this time publishing, or ways that you guys have gotten creative with your teams? Or does anyone have any other questions? Okay, we have another one in the chat. Do you tend to start writing or constructing potential papers in the midst of working on a grant?
I write everything all at once. So I think I do, because I like to, I write a lot of things all at once, but I also get ideas as I work on grants. So I am writing things all at the same time. So, because I get ideas as I'm writing grants, and I get ideas as I'm writing papers. So I think I do a lot of things all at once. So I don't separate things too much. That's me. But how about you, Kathy?
I agree with you that when I'm working on a grant, I come up with new ideas and when I go herring off after the new ideas sometimes. But I usually do compartmentalize. I find I do better if I focus on finishing the grant or finishing the paper. Often work on finishing the paper first so that it's out there being reviewed while I'm writing the grant.
That's right. And a lot of grants, I mean, for some grants, especially if you're doing a competitive renewal, like to see that you have papers. So you want to have the papers published. So you don't want to have the papers associated with those grants published. So there is that advantage as well. Interestingly, you can publish things in things like bioarchives. You can at least have them uploaded, and I think those count. So I think that's a good thing to know. Someone has asked, are journals having any delays in reviewing submissions due to the pandemic? I think that's sort of, it depends, I think, on the field. I think in some cases it's, some people, it depends on the field. So I've had trouble getting things reviewed from pulmonologists. But I think if people are not at, if they're not pulmonologists or they're not hospitalists and in the hospital, it might actually be slightly easier because they maybe aren't doing as much on-site work. So I think it sort of depends on the field.
I know that one of the journals that I'm associated with has changed their the time they give you to review a paper from 2 weeks to 3 weeks.
I've noticed that too.
Can we go back up to the top of the chat, because there's a number of comments here that are relevant. So Kim Powell from the library has offered to help, says the library can help find the databases, the potential public databases, and I will say that Kim is great to work with, so Marshall, please contact Kim about finding those databases. Kim says they have literature databases as well as data databases that are linked, and they can help you identify those. I sent the link to the N. Haynes database. Go ahead then from the next question. Joanna, the last question on the list.
So the next question that we have is, what do you think about the several different groups working same topics, such as COVID-19? How do you make sure that you are not submitting to the same journal?
I have no idea how to do that. I think that that is just something that the editors would have to, you'd have to sort of, if you are thinking about submitting a review, you might have to reach out to the editors. If you were proposing to submit a review, you know, if you're proposing to submit your own review to a journal, you might have to reach out to them and ask them about that.
And if it's original, I'm sorry.
You're asked to submit a review, you would imagine that it's not, you know, it's because you've been asked. I think that's what she meant.
And if it's original research, sometimes, and you know another group is working on it, sometimes you can arrange to simultaneously submit so that one group doesn't scoop the other.
Right.
But you'd have to talk directly to the other authors.
Right. Yeah, so you're right. If that's original research, you can definitely do that. But there's, I mean, I don't know how you would do that. Any other questions?
All right.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks. And if you come up with other ideas or other ways of working together as groups, I'm all ears, because we're trying to come up with interesting ways to work together.
Thanks, Joanna. This was very helpful, and also want to call a shout out to thanks to Kim Powell for telling us about the resources available in the library.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goldberg, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning.
Everybody stay safe.
Oh.
See you in person soon, I hope.
Bye-bye.